Coming to paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, All That Glitters. The goddess next door takes on a bikini-clad bank robber in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, All That Glitters in paperback and Kindle Unlimited this March. There's all this controversy regarding the cancellation of DC Comics' Second Coming, which is supposed to be a title under the Vertigo Imprint. And many are speculating that the title was canceled because of an online petition that got over 250,000 signatures, and others are speculating that the title was canceled due to low orders. And DC Comics publisher Dan Dido is saying that Second Coming was canceled because of edits. Now, as a publishing professional, as I've studied all the information regarding Second Coming, I can tell you the real reason why this book was probably canceled, and it didn't have anything to do with edits, as Dan Dido wants you to believe. Now, your Dan Dido is saying that the book needed to be edited, but with the book already being announced for advanced solicit 6 months ago, why would you want to cancel a book that's already been advanced solicited and probably printed? So I listened to Dan Dido's argument, and it's got some holes in it as related to talking about this book being canceled. Now, when I look at this whole thing as related to the petitions, that's a core reason I believe that this book was canceled, because there were over 250,000 signatures on that petition, and Warner Brothers was terrified of that number, because Warner Brothers Legal probably looked at that number, 250,000, and said to themselves, we've got 250,000 people protesting this book from Christian groups, and we've got the press, mainstream press, starting to talk about this book, and the negative press that they were going to get would lead to a firestorm of controversy that could completely engulf DC Comics in a scandal at an inopportune time, because right now DC Comics is very vulnerable at this point, and they're near what I'm calling the DC implosion 2.0, because they've recently canceled several titles, and several other titles they've had, like Border Town from the Vertigo Imprint, just went through a scandal with Eric Esquivel, and this scandal would exacerbate the problems already going on at Vertigo as related to their titles. So what DC Legal came in and said was, we don't need this controversy at this point, so what we're going to do is we're going to cancel the orders for this book, and then we're going to revert the rights of this book back to the creators. And that was a key thing right here, because when I looked at them giving those rights back, that's something most publishers don't do unless they see a property as being a liability. Usually when a publisher buys the rights to material, they want to get a profit on that material. So what they will do is they will keep the rights for that material for a certain amount of years. They will make sure that they're going to get a recoup on the cost that they put for printing this work, and they're going to try to make some money on this property because they've invested money in this property. When I heard that they, at DC, gave the rights back to the creators, that was a red flag for me as a publisher, because I know once a company gives back the rights, that means they're getting ready to take a huge loss on a property. So in order for them to take that type of loss, they had to see a huge liability coming over at DC. And I believe that Warner Brothers Legal came in and said, you know, you're making this comic talking about Jesus Christ being incompetent and coming back to earth, and then you're going to have him roommating with this Sun Man. And this type of stuff is already upsetting a good group of Christians right out here, 250,000 of them. And if this story goes to press mainstream, it's going to be a huge black eye for not only DC Comics, but for Warner Brothers products all across America and the Western Europe, because that's where a lot of Christians are. You have a large Christian base of over 300, 400 million people in both the US, Canada, and Europe. So you've got a couple of 100 million people in these countries, and Warner Brothers did not want to alienate those people or get them so upset to the point where they wanted to go out here and organize a boycott of all Warner Brothers products, including DC Comics, which is a part of Warner Brothers. So what they wanted to do to mitigate the loss on Second Coming was, again, go out here, cancel all the orders, and then revert the rights back to those creators because they wanted to minimize the damage to the DC brand. Now, what happened with Second Coming was similar to what happened at Judith Regan's imprint, Regan Books, a couple of years ago when she decided to publish the book from O.J. Simpson, If I Did It. Now, I remember back when they announced the publication and release of If I Did It, the book by O.J. Simpson, and there was a firestorm of controversy because a lot of people, they were very angry about this O.J. Simpson trial, and this book talking about O.J.'s possible confession of the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, that really stirred the ire of many people. Many people felt like it was rubbing salt in a wound because O.J. Simpson had been acquitted almost over 20 years ago of the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And this book was like one huge middle finger up at the family and many of the people who believed that O.J. Simpson was guilty of the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And HarperCollins, the publisher of If I Did It, they were feeling the heat from attempting to publish this book, and the press was so negative regarding this If I Did It that they had to pull all the books before they even got to the store. They had to take a huge loss on the, I think, 6 or 7 figure advance they gave O.J. Simpson's family for that book, If I Did It. And as a result, in the aftermath, what happened was Judith Regan, the publisher of Regan Books, an imprint at HarperCollins, was fired. And the reason why she was fired was because she brought about a firestorm of negative controversy to the HarperCollins business and almost destroyed the HarperCollins brand because people were getting ready, like in this case, to organize boycotts against HarperCollins and HarperCollins publications, all because she decided to publish what she believed was going to be a bestseller based on controversy. Because Judith Regan thought, oh, everybody's going to want to know what happened to O.J. Simpson and find out about his confession of this so-called murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, and people would be excited to hear this so-called confession in a book. Unfortunately, what happened for Judith Regan was Americans were so angry about hearing this confession regarding the controversial O.J. Simpson trial that they literally were so angry they were getting ready to boycott HarperCollins and HarperCollins publications. And in order for the company to save face, they had to pull this book, which cost them, I think, a couple of $1 million in advances and a couple million more for printing and promotion. And because of that, your Judith Regan was fired. And when I look at this case for Second Coming, I see huge consequences and ramifications coming from this comic. Now, this comic, your Dan Dido was sitting there trying to say it was because of editing reasons that the book was canceled. No, I believe that Warner Brothers legal and corporate executives, they now are aware of the dysfunction over at DC Comics right now, and this Second Coming is going to lead to the nail in the coffin for a couple of people that are senior at DC Comics, because this book almost led to a huge scandal that almost led to the DC brand and the DC properties winding up getting tarnished, and this almost destroyed the entire reputation of DC Comics. So we've heard about job cuts over at DC Comics regarding many people. And I assure you there's going to be some terminations as a result of this Second Coming comic. Somebody's going to get fired because this scandal, again, was 250,000 signatures. And when we look at the sales for DC's #1 book, Batman, DC's #1 book, Batman, gets 100,000 orders. So you had twice as many people upset about the Second Coming comic than what Batman gets in orders alone. And if you put Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, the three most popular properties at DC Comics, all of their orders combined do not match up to 250,000 signatures and nearly 100 million or 200 and 300 million people in the US and a couple of 100 million others in Canada and European countries abroad who are Christians being upset. So yes, somebody is getting fired as a result of this Second Coming comic, a comic book that if I were running DC Comics or Vertigo Comics as an imprint would never be considered for a green light, because I understand that the negative press is not something the industry needs right now in an effort to get sales. But what your Vertigo's editor-in-chief probably thought was, oh, this book will get a lot of controversy, it'll get a lot of press. But what they didn't understand is the controversy they were trying to get led to extreme negative press because America is a majority Christian country, and to make a comic book that literally blasphemes Jesus, the Son of God, is an insult to all the followers of God, many of whom knew from reading the Bible that Jesus did not make any mistakes and Jesus did not fail, because it was for him to come down on the earth and it was for him to die. So he came down to die, not just to be crucified by the Romans, but he died in order to pay the sin debt of all human beings from past, present, and future, and to pay for all of their sins, past, present, and future. So the Second Coming book, as many Christians like myself saw it, was blasphemous, and it was literally an insult to any follower of Christ and an insult to anyone who believes in Christ. So what DC was doing with this book, the Vertigo Imprint, was it was going out of its way to alienate an entire customer base, and that alienation could have literally led to the entire, again, obliteration of the DC Comics brand. So this was not a very smart decision by the editors at Vertigo, who, again, were only thinking about short-term controversy for short-term sales, but were not thinking about how to advance long-term intangibles like the reputation of the brand, which right now is in complete tatters due to the scandal with Eric Esquivel and many of the poor quality books that Vertigo makes, like Border Town, like Hex Wives, and like Your Goddess Mode, poorly written comics with poor quality concepts and poorly developed characters by poor, low-talented artists and writers. And Second Coming would have been the icing on a crap cake for the Vertigo imprint, which has been struggling since its initial launch. And I believe that this Second Coming will be the beginning of the end for the Vertigo brand. And the reason why I believe it's going to be the beginning of the end for the Vertigo brand is because the Vertigo imprint in its relaunch has completely stumbled out of the gate, and with Second Coming, they have alienated most of the comic buyers out there, and the brand has been completely tarnished thanks to this launch of this comic. And I believe that at the end of the day, Warner Brothers executives are going to finally shut down the entire Vertigo imprint because the entire brand is a failure. And I believe that, again, the editors-in-chief of the Vertigo imprint, like Judith Regan before them, they are all going to get terminated as a result of the launch of this Second Coming, and that their careers are practically over as related to Warner Brothers, because they brought liabilities to Warner Brothers. They cost Warner Brothers money, and they possibly put the DC Comics reputation at risk. And I believe also, finally, Dan Dido's reputation at DC is on thin ice at this point, because DC has recently gone through several major layoffs, and they've had several issues as related to the DC brand under his supervision that he got back recently. And this second coming being under his supervision, this is going to wind up making Warner Brothers executives take a long, hard look at him, because it was supposed to be something as a publisher he was supposed to try to make an effort to keep an eye on. He was supposed to take a critical look at this and then take a look at the audience and see if it was a good fit for the Vertigo brand. Now, I know the Vertigo brand was supposed to be about exploring new concepts for comics, but this concept was not one that fit the DC Vertigo brand from a business perspective. That's why I say his job, he's on thin ice at Warner Brothers, and he may also go out like Judith Regan, because Judith Regan, again, she thought, oh, everybody's going to be so caught up in the controversy, they're going to want to read this book. But what happened was most people were so angry about the content in If I Did It that they didn't want to even think about buying the book. And the same thing with Second Coming. People were so upset about the content in the book that they didn't even want to think about buying the book. In fact, they wanted to protest it. Now, I know Diversity in Comics, also known as Comics Matter, with your boy Zach, he thought that this was a form of censorship, that these church ladies were coming out to protest this Second Coming, but I don't see it that way. I mean, the same way people were upset over If I Did It, because that book was literally stirring up people's feelings regarding a very upsetting time in American history, the O.J. Simpson trial. Here we had a book that was literally trying to mock the beliefs of most Americans in America, and this wasn't about censorship. This was just about good business. And if you're doing business, in America, in the publishing world, you don't want to alienate people, because, again, in publishing, 90% of all books fail that reach the marketplace. And if you publish a controversial book that alienates people, you're not only going to have the book fail, but you're also going to lose the intangible of your reputation as a publisher, and you're going to wind up tarnishing your image in such a way that people don't want to buy your products anymore. So I understood why they pulled the book in this case, because it was all about DC Comics' already struggling reputation, and it was already about protecting the DC Comics brand, which has suffered over the last 10 years thanks to Dan Dido introducing the New 52 and leading to all of these structural problems in the DC universe. And those problems are leading to them, again, having layoffs and having a restructuring. So DC is at a very fragile and vulnerable point right now. And this book coming along, this was not going to help DC Comics' long-term reputation, as they're trying to do things like restructure themselves so they can get back into being a competitive brand. But it just shows that why we need to fire Dan Dido along with the editor-in-chief at Vertigo, because it's clear they are not focused on trying to go out here and engage comic readers and form a relationship with them, because they still believe in the whole adage of an angry reader being an engaged reader, and they're trying to generate controversy to get sales by making people angry. Unfortunately, in this case, they made the wrong people angry, and because they made the wrong people angry, what happened was they were stuck with a book they couldn't sell. They paid for this book they couldn't sell, and then they had to give the rights back to this book that couldn't sell. And now the Vertigo imprint, which just started this year, I believe, again, that brand will be folding by the end of this year. I mean, it started in 2018, actually, but I believe that the brand is going to be folding by the end of this year, because now Vertigo is clearly a liability to DC Comics' bottom line, and it's clearly a liability to DC Comics' reputation. So that's where I see things going as related to this whole Second Coming scandal. I believe that this book was canceled because Warner Brothers' legal team came in, Warner Brothers executives came in, they saw the impending scandal getting ready to come up and go nationwide and even international, and they wanted to squash that controversy before they had a Judith Regan type debacle going on, and that's why there won't be a second coming of Second Coming at DC Comics or any other independent comic publisher, because no one wants to wind up losing their business or their business reputation dealing with a controversy that alienates customers all across the globe. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.